Hi, everyone. This is Diane Bates from the American Historical Society of Germans from Russia. And we are here today to talk to the author and illustrator of our new book, Konrad the Camel, Wanderlust, The Adventures of Konrad the Camel, Wanderlust. And we have Anna Dahlheimer-Bartowski, who is the author, and Elizabeth Cook, who is the illustrator of this new children's book. And so we're very excited to learn some more about what inspired this book and the writing process that went into writing and drawing process that went into making it. So Anna, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Diane. As Diane mentioned, my maiden name is Dahlheimer, and I am a 100% Volga German descendant, both sides of my family. So I've just been fascinated with, my ancestry. When I found out all my grandparents are born in Russia, I've been on a mission to figure out everything I can. So that's really been my passion. Right now I serve on the AHSGR Board of Directors. I'm the co-chair of the Editorial and Publications Committee. And I've just been fascinated with our history, and we'll talk a little bit more about how I got fascinated with camels later on. But it's just been, I found my passion in writing. I majored in journalism. Now it's called media, but when I was in school, it was journalism. So I've been writing, and it only makes sense. I want to share my ancestor stories. I find this history unique. So I've done that with a number of books, and Konrad the Camel is just the latest edition.
Okay, great. Elizabeth, do you want to go ahead and let us know about yourself?
Yes, thank you. Well, I came late to any sort of illustration. I sort of fell into it, I think you have to say. I'm on the editing and publishing committee of the American Historical Society of Germans from Russia, along with Anna. And it just so happened that someone had a story that they had won a prize with, and they wanted to make a children's book out of it. So the only problem was she did not have an illustrator. Well, I've been, as I say, and my family says, doodling for years. So I just sent some of my doodles to Anna, to see if she wanted to send them to the author. And so she did, and the author said, okay. So then when Anna decided to finally write, I was, come on, Anna, write that book. Got it finished, and she asked me if I would illustrate the book, and I was very pleased, of course. So
Wonderful. Can one of you hold up the book? I know both of you have it sitting right there, so we can see the cover. There we go. And this is for sale on the AHSGR website. That's at ahsgr.org. So go look at it for Christmas presents or birthday presents or any of that fun stuff. So I'm going to start with a question for Anna, and then probably move to a question for Elizabeth, and then maybe we'll do some questions for both of them in the process. So Anna, what inspired you to write this book? Was there any event or something like that?
There's really two events that come to mind. Serving on editorial and publications, I mean, one of our strategic goals with the organization is to reach the next generation. So when Anna's Red Purse came up last year, and I worked with Ann Stang and Elizabeth on that book, we kept thinking about, well, how do we top this? What do we do next? We've got to keep our communications going to the children to bring them into their heritage. So, when this goes back probably, oh gosh, 4 or 5 years, when we first started the camel photo op at convention, we got that cutout of Konrad, and Shirley Wilcoxon named him Konrad the Camel, and she was the chair of marketing at the time. And we just had so much fun with that photo op. And every time I looked at Konrad, I remembered going to visit my grandma, and this is the real inspiration of why I wanted to do it. She kept saying, she was telling, when I was trying to find out about her background, and I was really young, I was only in grade school. When I found out she was born in Russia, I was like, how can this be? I mean, my images of Russia were frozen tundra, Dr. Zhivago, you know, and she said, oh yeah, and we had camels. And I'm like, oh my God, what? I couldn't grasp that concept. I could not envision camels in Russia, you know, with every image I had of Russia. So I've been on a mission to try to figure that out for a long time. And between the photo op with Konrad the camel and my interest piqued by my grandmother, I was like, we got to tell Konrad's story. We got to get the message out, because everybody was always intrigued about the camel, but they're like, were there camels in Russia? And yes, there were.
Great. Okay, Elizabeth, what was your inspiration for the visual style of this book?
Well, I guess you could best describe it as, you wonder how in the world musicians come up with a song. I mean, it's always intrigued me. These songs, where do they come from? Well, in me, when I read Anna's story, as with the other book, my images just appear in my head. What can I say? I see them. So yeah, the inspiration came from Anna's story. So as I read her story, there came the images.
There it was.
There it was.
There it was. That's great. How did you both work together to create like a unified vision for the book? Or did you even need to? Did it just come naturally?
Oh no, it definitely takes work, but it's fun work. You know, work sounds like it's a kind of laborious, but it really was a labor of love. Um, when, when Elizabeth would send me, I wrote it and I kept editing it because there were just certain tweaks that any book needs. And she would send me pictures and we'd say, well, where could this go? Or where were you thinking? And we just talked. I mean, Elizabeth's on my speed dial number. You know, I can't tell you how much we talked. I mean, we were hoping to get together physically, but it didn't quite work out. But we talked on the phone, and ultimately, when she got more pictures, I started kind of creating a storyboard. You know, like I'm thinking text goes here, but it didn't, my storyboard doesn't look anything like the final draft that Libby Horkin created for us. But we got the story placed. Kind of like, when people make a film and they do storyboard shots of what they anticipate. That's kind of what Elizabeth and I did.
Okay. Elizabeth, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, it really was fun because I didn't know this, but typically when people write a book for a big company, that they're a big publisher, the publisher, I guess, just designates an artist to do a particular book, and they never really collaborate. Well, I can't imagine working that way because part of, yes, I would send her images and she'd say, well, I'd like to have maybe the mama camel be a lighter color. And so she too had images in her head of the way she wanted her characters to look. So we work, I think, very well together. And I'm hoping that the final images and illustrations did reflect what she had in her mind. And I think they did, because we did work so well together.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so Anna, let's go back to you. How did you develop the characters and the plots?
Well, when I do a novel, I do an outline. But with a children's book, I thought, well, that's from the way my brain works. I start jotting down words like, what's going to be important? When there's got to be, besides, it's not just the camels, it's the farm. And there's got to be farmers. There's got to be Germans from Russia. So, you start playing with it. I mean, one of the first things I did is I knew Konrad's name, because we had all, HR and Shirley Wilcoxon had already assigned that. But then I'm like, okay, every family member's name is going to start with a K. And I went through all the K names. So, you work through it and then you start envisioning what each camel would look like. And you're like, well, this is a camel. He lives on a farm. What does he do? So you kind of try to put yourself in their shoes, like what would have been happening. And, he has to have a family and there's a farm family. And then you start playing out, what are the challenges? What do they experience? What do they see? And I placed it along the Karaman River because both my ancestral village, well, I've got a number of them, but the two that I am most familiar with, Marienthal and Rheinwald, are along the Karaman River. And that's how I always picture my ancestors. And that's where I had to picture Konrad. So it's a piecing together. You go from words to phrases to concepts, and suddenly you're writing something.
Hey, Elizabeth. So what was your process? Like kind of Anna talked about her process. What was your process for creating the artwork for the book?
Well, I had never heard of a Bactrian camel. And and I have to admit, at conference, I'm seeing this last year, this Konrad the camel sign, and I'm thinking, I had no idea what this camel was doing there. So anyway, when Anna comes up with this story, and I had to Google, I have to say, a Bactrian camel. And then I thought, oh, good grief, how do I make these shaggy creatures look adorable and, and appealing to children, right? So I have to admit, with my background, first thing I did, I went to the skeletal anatomy of a Bactrian camel. And then I started putting, muscles and fur and whatever on these camels. And then, I kind of got rid of the shagginess, although thank goodness they're kind of shaggy because, their wool was used for about everything, clothing, winter hats, stockings, I'm sure, bedding. So they were vital to the farmers. And but that was a challenge, learning how to draw a Bactrian camel to be a
What
Okay.
message or theme do you hope that children take away from the story?
Well, I hope they ask the questions about where did we come from? We're all pretty fortunate here in the United States to be living here. But a lot of people don't know how they got here. And I think that's a question everyone needs to understand. So I hope the kids get their curiosity sparked when they read this book. I mean, all of my books have to do with uncovering your ancestry, finding home, discovering how you got where you are. I mean, your story should be the most important. So understanding why you're here, and also understanding like for the ancestors, a lot of my relatives stayed in Russia. Thank goodness my grandparents came to the United States. Not everyone did. And to realize the impact of those lives for those who stayed and maybe ultimately, were able to survive and repatriate to Germany, like some of my family. So I think it's raising that question. I think what we all have to realize across the world is, we all are related. I mean, you may not want to accept that, but it's true. We are all cousins of some level. And, that to me, that's the important message, to realize we are really one.
Right.
Well, I would also like to add that although our main audience was helping children understand their heritage, their German Russian heritage, this book is not just about that. I've had adults read it and they enjoyed the story just as much as I think a 7-year-old would. And it is for any child in all of us, let's put it that way. And it's not just for German Russians, although that was our focus, but it's not just a book that would appeal just to German Russian. It has universal appeal, and I'm very proud that it is.
And it's about a historical time and location that anybody can benefit from learning about.
Yeah, and it's also a story about overcoming a fear, and
Mhm.
for a child or for us adults, just overcoming a fear we might have and facing it and taking care of it. And this story is has universal appeal. So
Yes. Let's see. Anna, was there a part of the book that was especially fun or especially difficult to write?
Well, the part that comes to mind, um, I don't know if it was hard, but it was getting the right tone for the scene where Conrad's, Kabir has made fun of Konrad, and he goes and he seeks solace with his grandfather. And I think this is an image that I hope stays with people, because your parents are there to help you, but sometimes that little distance, that little perspective from a grandparent can make all the difference. So I wanted to make it true to heart, but I also wanted it's kind of where Kingston tells Conrad where he's come from and what he's really going to all be about when he grows up. And I just found that very touching and key to helping Conrad face his fears.
Mm-hmm. And I love talking about that theme. Elizabeth mentioned it, and then you just mentioned it about facing your fears and
Mhm.
overcoming fear. Such a great
Yes,
for all of us.
yes.
So, okay, I have two more questions. The first one is just a little more general, just because we are here from AHSGR, which is the American Historical Society of Germans from Russia. And I just wanted to give you both a chance to sort of talk about your family's history and how that, Anna, you did this a little bit, but maybe you can elaborate how this parlayed into this book and give a little bit about, your family. And so all of our ancestors came here, immigrated to the US from Russia, where they had immigrated from Germany. But maybe any more detail you have?
Well, I'm kind of, I can remember talking to Lou Marquardt years ago, and I said, I'm a mixed breed because, a lot of people, they descended from a Catholic village. Well, my father descended from a Catholic village. My mother descended from a Lutheran village. So I considered myself a mixed breed as far as GRs are concerned, And, you know, my Lutheran family had, when they left Russia, my great grandfather had four daughters, and with the mirror system, so they came over and they went straight to Sheboygan, Wisconsin. My Dahlheimer family, um, they came over. My grandmother didn't like New York. She hated Ellis Island, and they followed the harvest for years. I mean, when I found out, I always knew we were German, but when I was like, yeah, we're German. We had to be from Germany. Well, no, they were born. This is the big challenge, understanding the Russia question. So, my grandmother, the one, all of her siblings stayed behind. So I think and she always said, well, because my dad grew up without any cousins. And she said, well, you probably, if they survived, you might have cousins in Siberia.
Mhm.
And, so I started blogging and writing. I mean, this was even, in the early 2000s, and trying to figure stuff out. But probably one of the best days was when someone named Vladimir Herman sent me an email and said, I think we might be related. And he is a gentleman we ultimately, make a long story short, his grandfather was my grandmother's youngest sibling. They were sent from Marienthal to Siberia,
Mhm.
and they were in the gulag. They worked in the labor camps. They struggled. And once they ultimately were able to leave,
Mhm.
they couldn't go back to the village. As many of you know, they went to Kazakhstan. And that's where my cousin Vladimir Herman was born. And ultimately, he repatriated to Germany. And we had the most perfect reunion over 100 years later when my sister, my brother-in-law, and I went to Germany to meet him. It was phenomenal to be welcomed, but I mean, just a huge family, and they were all able to repatriate to Germany. So that's like probably the most fun part of my history. And it was phenomenal. It was phenomenal.
That's an amazing story. Thank you. Elizabeth, do you want to talk a little bit about your family?
Yes, my family's a little bit different. We uh, in Rothamel, in the colony of Rothamel, the entire family of Bascles were living together. Their name was originally Pascal, so they were French or Austrian French or Alsace-Lorraine French. I don't know exactly where our earliest ancestor came from, but it was obviously some sort of French-speaking background. And it went first of all to a French colony, and then later went to Rothamel. But all of my ancestors, pretty much to a last man, ended up immigrating to Kansas, around Hays, Kansas, Pfeiffer, Schertschen, Victoria, Kansas. But a few did remain, but I think they died out before it really became bad in Russia. But it was interesting, though my ancestors went to around Pfeiffer and Victoria, Kansas, they were surrounded by German Russians. And I don't know why all of a sudden the family picked up, my immediate family, my grandmother and her parents and siblings picked up and moved about three counties away. And my grandmother never talked about a background, never talked about her parents. And it was really interesting. Years later, when it occurred to me that I knew nothing about my grandmother's background, he thought it was probably because when the German Russians arrived in Topeka, Kansas, where most of them went when they were settling in Kansas, they were ridiculed, they were laughed at, they were given jobs that nobody else would do. They were considered very pungently smelly. So at any rate, I think that stayed with my grandmother. I think she once told me her parents wanted all their children to work for English-speaking farmers so that they would learn English. And I think they realized by staying in a community surrounded by other GRs that spoke nothing but German, that wasn't going to happen. So I don't have a lot of the tradition that many German Russians do. So I'm just catching up. I'm just learning about traditions and my German ancestors. I mean, I know my family tree because I've done extensive research on them, but not their customs, their food. So it's been an eye opener for me. But it was my grandmother was my biggest fan.
And so thank you both of you for talking today about the making of Konrad the camel. And we look forward to the next one.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you for
Thank
your
you
great
very much.
questions. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.